Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of the Texas SignalCast. This is a special edition episode, a new series we're going to be doing called What It's Like to Be a Texas Democrat from, in this case, West Texas. In this episode, we have a special guest, John Mark Hogg. He's going to talk about his new PAC, 134 PAC, which focuses on Democrats in West Texas. Hello, John. Welcome. Tell us a little bit background about yourself and what kicked off 134 PAC for you.
Sure. Yeah, my name is John Mark Hogg. I'm a lawyer out here in San Angelo, Texas. Been here going on 30 years. And I've been involved in Democratic politics for years. I was a precinct chair. I was county chair back during the part of the Clinton administration, and served on city council. And then just most recently ran for United States Congress in District 11 when Mike Conaway retired. So we ran for that seat. And what I'm really here to talk about, of course, is the 134 PAC. I'm the founder, or one of the founders, of a new organization that we've just started this year since the election in November 2020, which is called the 134 PAC. And it's called the 134 PAC because what we are focused on is the area of Texas west of the I-35 corridor. If you go from El Paso to the I-35 corridor, there's 134 counties in Texas in that area. So we're talking a huge area. And it's also, there are some Democratic spots in there, but it's mostly a heavily red Republican. In the 134, we have the two most Republican congressional districts in the entire United States.
Wow.
Which was, at least it was at the last election for both 11 and 13. And so, and we have, there's much more to say about that when it comes down to state races and things too. But our goal is to focus on that area and to provide growth and basically start building the infrastructure for that area that we haven't had for Democratic candidates and parties in West Texas in, decades. So.
Mm-hmm. And so, speaking of that infrastructure, I looked at you guys' Facebook page and your social media, and you have a lot of facts about rural Texas in there. One of being that there's about 29% of rural counties in Texas, or at least of these 134, don't even have a Democratic Party chair. Can you talk about what it means to sort of build that infrastructure and what that might look like?
Yes, and that's really what we're focused on is, and I use that phrase political infrastructure from my days on city council when you're talking about infrastructure, roads and streets and the pipes, the unsexy things. And what we're talking about is, when I ran for Congress in District 11, which had 29 counties, half of those did not have county chairs or any sort of county party structure at all. That doesn't mean there's not Democrats there. It just means there's no party. When we started this PAC, that was one weakness that we identified that was a big hurdle for anybody running for office in this area, is not having that party structure at the county level and people that can introduce you and help you in their counties. And so when we started looking at this PAC, one of the first things that I wanted to do was let's get a handle on, what exactly is what is the county structure in this area? And so we've been in the process of trying to come up with the most accurate information on county chairs across the 134. There are, and by the party's own reckoning, which is the primary source of our information, 39 of those counties are absolutely vacant. There's nobody on the list that the Democratic Party has as a county chair. And that's 29% of 134 counties. There's only 254 counties in the entire state. So, and that does not even include the counties that have someone whose name is on there. But as I learned when I was running for office, when you start calling a lot of these rural county chairs, they have basically told the party years ago that they didn't want to do it anymore and they need to find someone else. And so their name is still on an official party roll, but they're not functioning as a party. And so that's one of the critical pieces of infrastructure I think that has to be built. But what we're talking about in a broader sense, even beyond just party organizations and networks, is things like messaging. It's things like polling and data modeling and those sorts of things, so that we can really have no one out here really has a good picture of where the Democrats are, where we should be focusing efforts with limited resources in these areas. What counties, can we really win county commissioner seats? Those sorts of things. And so it's really about one of the things we want. One of our first priorities is to build up a real data network for us to have to accurately model and identify the types of people that we need to be going after, and also the types of messaging that we need to do and be able to coordinate that on a regional level.
Right. And that's really interesting. I'm glad to hear that you're doing that. I wasn't exactly sure. And I definitely want to talk a little bit more about that piece of it. I'm curious, how does, you mentioned candidates and finding folks to run. How do you even run for a county, say a county commissioner seat, if there is no Democratic Party chair? So, I mean, is there a primary? How do you even get on a ballot?
Well, the simple fact is, if there's not, it doesn't happen. And what you see at the county level is, and we see this in counties, even those counties that do have county parties, is there isn't any focus. There are Democratic precincts in all of these counties, or strongly Democratic commissioners precincts in each of these counties that should be electing Democrats to commissioner seats, justices of the peace, that sort of thing. Without being, I believe, as far as running a primary, someone can still run in a primary if they choose to. They just have to go through the state to get that done if there's no county party. But mostly what happens is, once you get to that level, once there's no longer someone who's the official voice or advocate for Democrats in that area, it just doesn't happen. The county just shifts over. Everyone's Republican. And that's one of the things I think that you see that's different about West Texas and how red these areas are, that I think people miss is, if you want to talk about it from a national politics level, okay, yeah, they may talk about that. But when you get it down to county commissioners and justice of the peace, there's no difference. I mean, it's people become Republican because that's what you have to do to be elected. But if you were to go up as a Democrat and talk with some of these elected officials and talk about issues and policies and things, you'll find out they really don't have that. You've probably got a lot more in common than you do than you would think. And so it's the people that are voting Republican, and even my Republican, county chairs here in Tom Green County will say the same thing. They look at their list of the people that are voting in the Republican primary, and they're going, that person's not a Republican. That person's not a Republican. But if you want to have a say in who the sheriff is, it's decided in the Republican primary. What we want to do is we want to start trying to take that back a little bit. We want to start promoting and growing the vote in Democratic primaries, which we have been doing without any real organization over the last few years in the primary, in the city areas, San Angelo, Midland, Odessa, Lubbock, Amarillo, Abilene, places like that. The Democratic vote has been growing slowly. What we want to do is really put some effort into increasing that, getting people used. Part of the biggest hurdle you have out here is just running as a Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
It's just saying I'm a Democrat and I'm running as a Democrat, and getting people used to the idea that you're not crazy, that you don't have wild horns coming out of your head. You're not from, you're not AOC, and no disrespect to her at all. I'm just saying that's the mentality that you have. You have to get over that hurdle before they can even start listening to you about, what it is that you want to do on local issues. And I think local politics is where most of that can come into play.
Yeah, I mean, I think, trying to define our party at the state level or even regionally is different from the national party has been a struggle for us. So what are some of the issues that you would say rural Texans are talking about that maybe urban, suburban Democrats in the national party are not quite as focused on? What can we start talking about?
Well, the big hurdle, there's probably three, I would say, that are the biggest hurdle for a Democrat that just getting beyond. Guns is one. That's just as simple as it is. And, and that's one of those things that evokes a lot of, emotion on both sides. But the idea of getting rid of guns, that is an obstacle that you have to overcome if you're going to run as a Democrat out here. You cannot run as a Democrat out here and be saying we're going to go take everybody's guns like Beto did. I mean, that's just that's just not going to sell.
Right.
And I'm not talking about the merits of it one way or the other. I'm just saying as a practical matter.
Sure.
That's
Yeah.
what it is. And so you have to get over that hurdle. One of the ways we did that in our campaign is, you can talk about guns and say, I'm not giving up my guns. I'm not going to ask anybody else to give up theirs either. But I do think there are some common sense things that we can do in relation to gun safety that can be done that are far short of that are rational. And I think even a lot of Republicans out here would agree with. Such as background checks and things like that. So you've got to kind of frame that message a little bit differently. Abortion's another huge one. And kind of going back to, during the Clinton era, they kind of talked about it making safe, legal, and rare, that sort of thing. That sort of a message works a whole lot better than the message that we've been putting out right now. And part of that is also, I think it's also a reach to the Hispanic community. The mistake that we see in West Texas is this idea that Hispanic voters are a block and that they're a monolith and that they're all going to vote together, and they're not, because there's many differences among Hispanic folks as there are among white folks or Black, as far as political views, as far as social issues, things of that nature. And there's a huge conservative element in West Texas and Hispanic, and that favors the Republicans in that regard, and abortion plays into that. So, and the biggest one, of course, this last session is just oil and gas and the economy. And it's once the National Party gave in or promoted this idea out here of, we're going to ban fracking. And I'm saying whether the message was right or wrong as far as how it was said, that was the impression that people had. And that was a huge chain around Joe Biden and the Democrats out here up and down the ballot. And I had to face that in my race. And so you have to start building a message that's more about, we support oil and gas, but we're also talking about looking towards the future and what does the future look like? The future's already here. Green energy is here. We're the biggest producer of green energy in the United States out here in West Texas. And so there's a lot of good that goes with that. So those three issues, I think, are probably the biggest hurdles for Democrats, from a national conversational standpoint, where I think Democrats have the potential to really make headway is on local matters and local control out here, because that's what we see the Republicans moving against in such a strong way in Austin. And we've basically ignored focusing on local issues. And we see that as an opportunity where I think, we're talking about not just in county level races, but in state legislature and in district level races to make that sort of impact.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, to go over the three main issues you brought up, I mean, to start with the oil and gas issue, I think is really important. And, we saw, I'm from Beaumont, so I'm from Southeast Texas, but oil and gas is big there. And, what I noticed, I was a county executive director there 2008 when Obama ran, before I moved, and then I moved to Austin. But that was the last time Democrats won there in Jefferson County. And, it was a lot of the social issues. These three issues are a big part of that. Because before it was a heavily unionized area. They were Democrats on economic issues. They supported Democrats, but then Republicans managed to find these social issues, and they started pulling away these more conservative folks. And I mean, these are guys who didn't even, they barely get a high school degree, go to a trade school, and they're making 70 grand a year in an area where land is cheap. So they're living great for 70K a year, and they think we're attacking these jobs. And
yeah, Reeves County in West Texas is a similar example. It went for Hillary in the last election and has been Democratic in presidential elections for a long time. It went for Trump this time, and and the biggest, and of course, it's a huge Hispanic area. It has huge growth because of the oil and gas boom, and so you see there's lots of changes, and so there are opportunities for Democrats there. I think the thing that I would um, be not necessarily critical, but I think the idea that there is one national or even statewide message that's going to appeal across this huge state, across these huge, I mean, there's some big cultural differences between Beaumont and Pecos, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so being able to try to be able to have the freedom for candidates to be able to, and it's not necessarily changing the message or saying something different, it's just how you're talking about things. And you know, so there's a lot of variety that we need to be able, and freedom that we need to be able to have in these regions. And that's why we started with the 1-3-4. I mean, this is not something that we see. You know, we're focused on rural Texas and rural West Texas because that's where we are and that's what we know. You have the exact or very similar issues related to infrastructure and you know, basically counties being taken over by Republicans and no Democrats really being able to compete there and that sort of thing. And a lot of that is in what I ran into as a candidate was it's this hurdle of just having the D at the end of your name and
Mm-hmm.
calling yourself a Democrat. You've already got, I mean, my district is an 80-20 district, you know, and Republican plus 40, 42, that sort of thing. So you've already got a huge hurdle to get against. But the one thing that we have made a mistake about is not having candidates that people can see, good quality candidates and vetted candidates and candidates that are supported, um, that people can see, you know, these are good people. These are not, you know, I'm I'm trying to be careful with how I say this because it's not that we disagree necessarily on so many things from more progressive areas of the state or more progressive areas of the country or even more progressive policies. There may be a lot of similarities there, but it's just the demeanor and how it's pushed. I mean, the whole message this time, you know, was, you know, it was almost like Civil War kind of stuff. The messaging that we got from Republicans, which was basically all these Yankee socialists are going to come down here and take over everything and destroy your way of life. I mean, that's really the message
Yeah.
in a nutshell that was done out here. And so we have to have a presence. And you know, we view building this infrastructure out as a place to start, not as a place to finish. We've come into this. This is not a pact to elect a candidate or for any particular issue or for any particular. This is to do the really unsexy work over 20 to 30 years, because we know it's going to take 20 to 30 years to start showing the improvements that we need to have to basically save Texas and save rural Texas. What we really saw, or what I saw too, and I'm not the only one, but many people did, is to win statewide, we've got to chip into the Republican vote in the red areas. You know, for example, you know, Joe Biden lost Texas by what, 6%? You know, if you could increase your Democratic vote in some of these red areas by 3, 4, 5% across the board over time, that 6% will vanish. You know, so it's sort of like you know, and I understand why the party focuses on Harris County and Dallas County and the big county. That's where that's where a lot of the vote is, and that's where we're doing well. I just think now it's time, and what I hope to do is try to refocus, take some of that effort, and say let's focus it a little bit on this rural area. And that's what I would tell people is we don't have to win a single one of these counties to get a governor elected, to get a presidential candidate elected, to get a senator elected. We just have to increase our focus, and we have to increase our turnout and increase our vote in these areas. And like I said, that's a long-term project. So that's how
Yeah.
we're.
Well, it seems that Republicans recognize that too, because that's why their voter suppression efforts are focused in places like Harris County and Dallas County, where these large pockets of votes and people vote in different ways. One of the messages I've found to resonate across the political spectrum is the idea of fairness. And what I would hope is that's a message that resonates with folks in West Texas,
Yeah.
with redistricting coming up and how that's going to affect folks out there and the resources they can get. There's so many different things. And just to go right back to the oil and gas message, I think one of the things I like to say when I hear people talk about, Democrats are going to destroy your jobs and things is like, we're preparing for the future, yes, but look at what oil and gas companies are doing themselves. They're becoming energy companies, not just
Yeah.
oil and gas companies. And you have to be able to see that writing on the wall. And if they're heavily invested in oil and gas in your area, but they're shifting away from that, not because of the government, but because of the global market. What does that mean for your area, and who's really invested in making sure that you have jobs in the future and the jobs of
Yeah.
the future?
And that's a great message. It's hard to get people to it's hard to get over that when the boss is going to his workers at the oil site saying, "You better vote for Trump because if you vote for Biden, you're going to lose your job."
Yeah.
You I think that was probably one of the biggest motivators on vote where counties like Reeves County, it's kind of like, you know, to them it's a non-issue if it's I'm going to lose my job. And what I have a difficult time what you have a difficult time getting folks in those areas with those jobs to focus on is, what does the future look like? I mean,
Hmm.
uh, and talking about, well, we don't want the oil and gas industry to be like coal where it just goes away. I mean, it needs to transform so that it can become something else. But it's really, I don't have the answer to how to do that. That's one of the things we want to find out. Is we want to do some focus groups, we want to do polling, things like that, so that we can figure out what sort of message on these issues, on the environment, on abortion, on gun control, those sorts of things. How do you talk about those things in rural areas? Because I don't think we have much focus on it in the Democratic Party right now. Exactly how do you appeal to that? And recognizing the uniqueness of doing that in uh, Lubbock as opposed to Austin.
Hmm. And we used to have some great messengers of rural Texas, folks like Jim Hightower, and people who could speak to those areas very fluently. I don't know what necessarily, we become an increasingly urbanized state, but are you seeing any other pockets of sort of progressive leaders, maybe at the county levels, some of these other cities, where we're farming and maybe we can build a bench? Are there areas where we should be looking for folks that are doing some good stuff?
Well, there are. It's just so sporadic, um, and it's not necessary. To me, what we're trying to do is try to push it away from the ideology part, because if you get into the in rural Texas, if you get into progressive versus conservative, moderate, that sort of thing, you're already losing.
Yeah, you already lost,
You're
right?
already losing.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
you know, you know, to a certain extent, public school is a progressive policy, and that issue right there is a good example of local issues that resonate very well in rural areas.
Hmm.
Rural hospitals and medical care, the lack of rural broadband. There's a lot of progressive issues like that. You don't have to focus on. I mean, you have to be able to deal with abortion. You have to be able to deal with guns. You have to be able to deal with oil and gas. But there's so many issues out here and so many people that are addressing them that you could really latch onto and make some hay with rural voters. And so there's things like that. There are what we have to do is we do have to build a bench, because we don't have a bench for the most part. They're recruiting candidates to run for offices, even in counties that have organized Democratic parties, like in Ector County and Midland County and Tom Green County and Lubbock County, is very hard. And part of that is because, why should I do that? What we really have to start doing is getting, once we get our infrastructure built, like I said, this is not about 2022 or even 2024 or
Hmm.
2028. It's years down the road, but being able to build that structure out over a long period of time, being able to identify, you know, there are several counties in West Texas that, just with the analysis we did through my campaign, you can sit there and go, that county is ripe to be a Democratic county. This county is ripe to be, or this precinct is ripe to be a Democratic precinct. It's just there for the taking, but we don't have, the party doesn't have any infrastructure, doesn't have any plan of how to go about that. And that's where we take that data. This is kind of the 30,000 foot view. We build the data over time, we identify those areas, and then we figure out, what sort of resources can we provide and put into those. And then also, we also want to talk with candidates who are interested in coming to rural Texas.
Mhm.
You know, you can't, you're not going to get support in rural Texas unless you go there. And I think
Mhm.
that's one of the things that Beto showed. And I think even Mike Collier did that to a pretty good extent of, you've got to go there, and you got, they're not just going to respond to, a social media advertisement and that's going to get you the votes, but showing that you care, that you see the importance of rural issues, both from agriculture and from energy and all these other issues. um, I think is an important issue. And I think, I wish more of our statewide candidates would at least take the time to at least appear, even if it's for a short time, uh, to deal with those issues. Those are the kind of things that get people excited. When you have when you, quite frankly, if all you're ever doing in a small county is having the county commissioner, a rally for a county commissioner, you're not going to get many people to show up anyway. If you get a governor candidate come to town, well, that's a different, people get excited about that, so there's just a lot of that sort of thing that people just have forgotten about. And I'm not saying they've intentionally done that, but that's just the fact of it is over time. That's what it has become. And and we recognize as West Texans that, it's not up to somebody from Houston or Austin to figure out what we need to do. We're the best ones. You know, the party chair in Austin doesn't know who should be a county chair in Loving County, of all places, or Dawson County. That's going to be up to the local folks to try to start building that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that infrastructure is so important because, if you're campaigning for a statewide office and you look at the map and it's all red, you
Yeah.
don't know where to go or why you would go there. It seems like a waste of time instead of doing 5 events in Harris County. But that's a good segue to my next question, which is what platforms exist? What are the best platforms for communicating with rural voters? I know it used to be AM radio, and for Republicans,
Yeah.
they owned AM radio, and it was such a great medium for them. What's sort of the best route for Democrats? And
Um, it kind of depends on where in the area that you're talking about. If you get into Midland, Odessa, and Lubbock, the more urbanized areas, those are urban areas, but they still think of themselves as rural. Um,
Mhm.
in the true rural areas, local newspapers are still, it is a forgotten treasure. There are dozens of small town papers. They may be weeklies, they may be bi-weeklies, those sorts of things. That's one way. And it sounds silly in this day and age. It's, and they typically don't have websites, or they may have a minor website, and, you're not really getting access to it that way. So that's something not to forget. Rural radio is still big. There are a lot of radio stations in rural areas that have a huge reach, huge listening audiences. Um, and so that's something that shouldn't be forgotten. One of the things we really need is we need some sort of democratic talk radio that's talking about these kind of issues, and even talking about issues that matter to rural areas, such as public education, such as health, such as, and I don't want to say a Rush Limbaugh type, because I don't want that by any stretch of the imaginations, but somewhere to shows that can reach out in those areas. And podcasting would be a good alternative if we can't. But um, the as far as social media platforms, Facebook is the biggest one, is what I ran into. I mean, as far as if you want to reach people, there are more people doing that than Twitter and TikTok and Instagram and those sorts of things. But um, so there's things like that candidates can use, and that's what we hope to be able to provide for candidates, as a clearinghouse of, what do you need to be doing, how do you need to be contacting people, and that sort of thing. One-on-one is still the best, of course, but Obviously, a statewide race is a different animal altogether. But um, those would probably be some of the things that I would think of. And the problem, of course, that we have in our districts, like in my district, is you have such huge districts, and sometimes you have multiple media markets that you have to deal with and things like that. So it gets real expensive, and the time and the travel and all those sorts of things. But those would be the things that I think are untapped as far as Democrats go, and particularly a lot of these rural papers. You don't think about them because it's just a bunch of Republicans in that county, and that's where I say I think we're misreading that. Um, we look at that based on how many people are voting in a Republican primary, but how many people are voting in a Republican primary is not necessarily a good indication of how many Republican votes there are there. So,
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. It's a little difficult in Texas without a party affiliation way to sign up for that, and we kind of have to read a little bit
yeah.
of the tea leaves on that, and that is difficult. So that kind of brings me to what you mentioned earlier. You talked a little bit about your trying to improve the data usage and really understand rural Texans better. What are your processes for that? What are you trying to what's your sort of plan to do that outreach?
Well, part of the issue is um, the data is generally not very good
Hmm.
in rural Texas, um, and the modeling that you can do with it to show what you're realistically likely to do in a given election is not accurate. Um, and you know, Van and the data that we have is very good. It's a good model. Of course, it's built out on a national basis. But when it comes down to micro targeting and getting into the households and things of that nature, um, it's not. It's more designed around urban, suburban, voters. I believe, and so what we're trying to do is build off of that and fine tune it, so to speak, for rural areas. And so we can, and through contacts, to clean out, the number of bad phone numbers you get is just astronomical. And I know that's a problem all over the state with it. So it's not just a rural problem, but uh, a lot of these areas are poor folks. There are people that move in and out, particularly in the oil and gas all the time. And so things are changing. Trying to get on top of that and be able to, through our use and through connections with that data to improve that data, uh, to get more responsive information and also to be able to clean it up in Van, so that then, the state candidates or whoever wants to campaign in that area has better information. Um, and then what we want to do with that is be able to create a profile for every county that I can really identify for every county in the 134. Here's your profile. Here's your best Democratic precincts. Here's the commissioner's precinct you should be winning. This is where you need to focus on. And a lot of that is to be able to have something to show a scientific basis. It's not the solution, but it's an important tool that we're missing for the most part. Particularly if you get into a small county that has not much in the way of um, any sort of organization. And we did that several times during my race. We were able to go into a county where you have a party, even if you have a county chair who just views it as, well, yeah, I'm a Democrat just because I'm a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat and I'm not giving up, but I don't see there's much use. I got this message a lot of times: don't even waste your time. Don't even stop in this county. But then when you look at the data that we were able to generate and clean up, and be able to go to them and say, look, here's how many people that we think are Democrats that aren't voting. You know, you have so much potential, and the ability the amount of dollars that you can spend on growing votes in West Texas is minuscule. I mean, you can get new Democrats to turn up at the polls for pennies on the dollar compared to what you would get new Democrats to show up to new voters to show up to vote Democrat in Houston or Austin. We
It,
did. Yeah, go ahead.
Is
Sorry.
that because of the media market expense, or
Because no,
how?
it's because it's partially, I think, probably because of the media market expense and some reasons, but the main reason I think is because it's been forgotten. It
Mm,
hasn't paid that much attention. So there are lots of people in
mm,
our race in District 11. When they ran the analysis, they come up with about 18 to 20,000 people that we identified from the metadata as most likely supporting Democratic causes and Democratic candidates who were not voters, and not even not voters, had never voted ever, those sorts of things. And we're not, these areas are there because they're not being contacted. No one has ever called them. No one has ever sent them a letter. No one has ever gone by and knocked on their door. And that just doesn't happen because you don't have the infrastructure that you have in Travis County or Harris County or Dallas County on reaching out and voter networks, and get out the vote efforts and education. So there's just a whole lot more people percentage wise to the population that you can get. We also my campaign we use as an experiment too. And we just said, we're just going to go all digital. We're not going to do, we're not going to do TV, which we didn't have the money for it anyway. But
maybe,
we were still able to raise $150,000 for my race, which is more than any Democratic candidate has out here. And we did that through the data and targeting fundraising and getting out the vote. The When we did the digital, what we did was we just decided to go totally digital. And it turned out to be some of the areas in the counties that we pushed our digital ads in were so inexpensive. I mean, it was just not even funny. When we start talking for the placement, they're going, no one's ever advertised in this county. You know, Places like Erie and County, which is just right next door to San Angelo and is kind of a bedroom community. No one's ever pushed digital political ads there. And so there's it was just, like I said, pennies on the dollar. That's sort of an exaggeration. That's probably hyperbole. I'm sure my data people could come up and give you an exact dollar amount, but what it is. But I think there is a lot more potential in rural Texas than people realize.
yeah.
We did not have the resources to fully mobilize that, and that's kind of part of what we think with the 134 pack we can do. If that work is already done, if all the data that we've collected, if all the surveys, the polling and things are done, and if we can keep that up to date year after year and election cycle after election cycle, then when a candidate does come along, a statewide candidate or a district candidate who wants to run in a certain area, it's done. Here it is. We'll share with you what we've got, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel and go out and trying to start bigger, because that's what we were doing in my campaign was, not really even having a sense. I mean, we knew there was Democratic spots out there, but not really even having a sense of where they were.
Yeah, you're doing the real sort of Lewis and Clark work out there. Just
Yeah,
really,
well, that really is, and it like I said, it's like, and I use this joke with my wife lovingly, but it's like, when I say, when she wants new countertops in the kitchen, I say, yeah, but we need new plumbing. That's not sexy. That's not fun. It's not something fun or pretty. But if you don't have that, all the other stuff, the candidates and the messaging and all that is just not going to work. It's very much a practical political view of things in West Texas, and not an ideological, but really building up a party structure and a party idea, and that people start getting used to Democrats being on the scene again.
exactly. No, I think that's great. That's exactly what we need to focus on, the infrastructure building. Do you have any immediate goals for 2021 for this project, or you just started still laying the groundwork?
We have laid the groundwork. Our website is the134pack.org. We're also on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. So, folks can follow us on that. We are in the initial fundraising stage right now. We have just gotten started. We've hired an executive director who is Stuart Williams. He used to do some of the rural organizing for the Texas Democratic Party up in Lubbock. And what we're really focused on right now is raising the money, being able to raise, we can start doing the data analysis for 134 counties district wide. And what our goal is, what we really want to do, the 134 gets around. We're kind of doing it in a different way. We're not as focused on the general election right now as we are the primary. We want West Texas to grow more in participation in the Democratic primary, because that's where we think we start to build it up. And the 134, I think in the last few primaries has usually been getting about 4.3%, makes up about 4.3% of the Democratic primary vote. We want to try to push that to 5, and start doing things. And that's a huge thing to do. Whether we can achieve that or not in one election cycle, maybe not. But we're trying to raise the money so that we can pay, because it'll cost, to do what we really want to do with the data, it's going to cost a couple $100,000 to do it well and to do it professionally and to do it for that entire area. So we're really pushing to raise that $200,000 by the end of this year, and we think that will have us a long way towards it. At least we won't be able to have the entire 134 done, but we'll have the main pockets and the bigger areas that we need to focus on identified, and be able to give to a county chair, here's a county profile that has detailed information about your county, and we can customize and make lists, call lists and things of that nature. And that's another part of what we want to do is with county services, is focusing on recruiting county chairs, finding county chairs, and building services, training and otherwise, that people know, where they can get help, particularly on things like, van and raising money and funds and things. So often, if you can find somebody who is willing to be a county chair in one of these rural counties, they may not be technologically sophisticated. They might not even be the internet infrastructure to do everything that they need to do. And so trying to find them support on van and helping them do those things, I think that's going to be a key part too. First and foremost, we're focused on raising the money to do this data analysis.
Well, that makes perfect sense. Well, I appreciate your time and
Sure.
kind of laying this out. It's really the really important work that we have to do as Democrats. If like you said, we want the fun thing of waking up one day, Texas turning blue, but it's going to take a lot of this hard work of plumbing to put together to make sure that we got that pipeline in place.
I tell people I feel kind of like Churchill. All I can promise is blood, sweat, and tears.
And maybe some whiskey.
Yeah, that might be good too.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate it. So it is the134pac.org. Also the 134pac on Twitter and on Facebook. John, I did mispronounce your name. I guess at the top here, I said Hogg. It's
Hogg, but if you say Hogg, I'll answer for that just the same too. So I'm good.
Well, I have to ask it. Is there any relation to the late Governor Jim?
Yeah, I'd never get that question.
Really? Oh, yeah, sure.
I'm kidding.
Yeah.
No, there's no relation. I'm sure there may be something back in the old country. My folks are originally from over in your area. My parents were from Orange, Texas, and
all right, yeah,
just plain old working class folks. So, but then I wound up out here in West Texas. So.
Well, we appreciate it. You're doing great work, and we look forward to catching back in with you soon.